Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going over the very brief geography and the history of Timor-Leste or East Timor. Timor-Leste is its official name, but it's referred to as East Timor in most English-speaking countries, including the one I live in, so I'll probably go back and forth in the names of the country. Let me get pencil out so I can point out a few things to you. First of all, there's two little geography features about East Timor that every geography nerd always points out when they talk about this country. One is that Timor comes from the Malay word for east. Leste comes from the Portuguese word for east. So either way you say it, the country is east, and geography nerds get a kick out of that. The other is that Timor-Leste is the only Asian country that is entirely south of the equator. Those are like, if you try to look up any kind of like fun, cool fact about East Timor, those are the two you're gonna find. But there's a lot of interesting features about East Timor. For one thing, as you can see, it is half of an island. This is the island of Timor. It borders the Banda Sea up here, the Savu Sea on this side, and the Timor Sea down here. And of course, it borders Indonesia. Now, check this out. East Timor has an exclave right here. An exclave means a part of the country that is not touching like the main part of the country. If that sounds weird, Alaska is an exclave of the United States. Like, think of it that way. We'll get into it in its history. But geographically, this huge mountain range cuts right through the middle of the country. This is the Romulo Mountains. The highest point is right here, Tatamelo. Being south of the equator, East Timor is very tropical. It's very humid. And of course, very mountainous, as you can tell by the huge mountain range going through it. The capital city is Dili, right there. And it has two other islands with it. There's Otoro right here, and there's a very teeny one, which is right here. You can't really see it on here. That is the island of Jako. It's uninhabited though. It is part of a national park that pretty much covers the whole tip of the island here. It is the Nino Kona Santana National Park. And it contains Timor-Leste's largest lake. You can see right there. It's called Ira Lularo. And if you kind of look in the corner over here, this is Australia down here. You can actually kind of see, there it is, Darwin right there. One of the, probably like the largest city on the northern coast of Australia. That becomes very important later. Don't forget that. I think that's pretty much it for geography. It's such a small country, like that's pretty much it. So let's get into its history. The first signs of human life was found right here in this town, up here in the very tip in Tutuala. It's at least 42,000 years old. But the current populace of people who consider themselves East Timorese came from a few regions of Asia. One was the Vedo-Australoid, so think kind of like India, Sri Lanka-ish area. The Melanesians, which would be the islands way over there, sailed on in. And finally, it would be the Indo-Chinese, which is pretty self-explanatory. Indo, Indonesia, and Chinese. That came down during separate migrations to this island and settled in what is now East Timor. The island of Timor became a huge trading post and a big stop-off for trade for many Asian countries. Their main export was sandalwood, which is one of my favorite scents. It smells wonderful. I love woody smells, so sandalwood's one of my top smells. It's used in like incense and any kind of fragrant thing, so it was very desired. And that's why the Europeans wound up landing on the island of Timor. The Portuguese were the ones to get there first. They established Dili in 1769. And they brought with them, everything that European traders bring with them. And also they brought over their religion. So the reason that we have this exclave is that there were quite a few missions that were set up on this part of Timor. And it became very Portuguese influenced. So as areas over here were becoming Portuguese influenced, so was this corner. So they remained part of East Timor, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Just keep that in mind. But the other big European power coming through this area was the Dutch. The Dutch wound up claiming pretty much the rest of Indonesia, including this half of the island, and the Portuguese and the Dutch went back and forth over who should control the island. Obviously, the people who lived on the island were none too pleased about all of this. There was actually a huge rebellion from 1911 and 1912 against any kind of occupation. But they wound up, after a long time, agreeing to just share the island. Portugal declared this part Portuguese Timor, and they established this line in 1914 after many negotiations with the Dutch. And for the most part, Portugal basically neglected the island in terms of taking care of the people who lived there. They were just mostly interested in the resources, and they also used this island as a place to exile any political opponents or anarchists, anyone that basically disagreed with their government, which obviously the people were none too happy about. But things really, really start to make a turn for the worse for the island on February 20th, 1942. So if you know your basic world history, World War II is running rampant around the world at this time. The Japanese came and occupied the island because they were making their way south all across the islands of the Pacific and taking them over. Obviously, the people who lived there weren't going to stand for that, and neither were the Allied power, especially since, like I said, Australia is literally right here. So the Allied forces came to the island to get the Japanese out, mainly Australian forces. And that started the Battle of Timor, which lasted for almost exactly 1 year. It was not a good time for the people living on Timor. About 40,000 civilians were killed during this battle. And the Japanese wound up winning and pushing the Allies off the island. The Japanese, like they did to most of the lands they conquered, was that they took all the resources for themselves and left the villagers high and dry, which definitely happened on Timor. It's estimated that, including the battle, about 70,000 civilians lost their lives during the Japanese occupation. And a quick aside, if you know my videos, this is for relaxation purposes and also to educate you. I'm not going to go into any details about some of the horrible things that happened in this country's history, just for the sake of relaxation. So that's basically as in-depth as I'm going to get, is just saying this happened and these many people died. We don't need to go into any more extreme detail because that's not very relaxing, at least in my opinion. So that's where we're drawing the line on the horribleness, because my goodness, this country's had so much horribleness. This is just the beginning. So World War II ends, Japan loses, and they wind up giving the island back to the Portuguese, who continued to just completely neglect the island. And in 1974, there was a coup over in Portugal. They booted out their old oppressive government and started to establish democracy, during which they pretty much completely abandoned their colony of Portuguese Timor. They were just left on their own. A civil war broke out between the two major political parties in 1975. One was the UDT, and the other one, the nickname for it is Fretilin. Still a major player in Timor-Leste politics today. Fretilin declared independence for East Timor on November 28th, 1975. And basically, like a day later, Indonesia invaded. They claimed that they were trying to stop a communist government from taking hold in the area. And they made it a province of Indonesia in 1976. And this is yet another really horrific time for the people living in East Timor. Again, not getting into details, but it was a very brutal, very cruel occupation. Some people have likened it to a genocide, especially after the 1991 Dili massacre, also known as the Santa Cruz massacre, because that's the name of the graveyard where it took place, where 250 East Timorese lost their lives during a peaceful protest against the Indonesian occupation. That event really woke up the world to what was going on here on the island, the atrocities that were happening. And many protests broke out around the world in favor of East Timor. And eventually Indonesia withdrew, but not for any reasons to do with the protests or the movement against them in East Timor. The president of Indonesia resigned in 1998, which basically overhauled their government, which basically led to them withdrawing. And he didn't resign for any reason to do with East Timor, completely different reasons, which we will get into when we cover Indonesia. This is not the video to go into that. Same with the Portugal coup. We'll get to that when we cover Portugal. So what happens to East Timor, right? So Indonesia and Portugal got together at the UN to come up with a referendum to help out the people in this country, because they've been oppressed for far too long. They've been neglected. They've been, they've had a bad time of it, right? So the UN General Assembly came to a vote, and they decided that East Timor should have independence. So violence wound up erupting in East Timor due to this, which I can understand why. I mean, I'm a very pacifist person. I don't believe in violence whatsoever, but I do believe that when your country is left high and dry and the people are starving, people get angry. People don't just accept their fate and, roll over and pass away. They get mad. Also, I think the island was just very tired of other countries and forces deciding what they were going to do. The violence movement that broke out because of this was called the East Timorese Crisis, which slowly came to a rest. On August 30th, 2001, the East Timorese got to vote in their first election, where they voted for their government, who voted on the Constitution, so on and so forth. It resulted on their official United Nations recognized independence on May 20th, 2002. East Timor became the first new country of the 21st century. So far, there's only been two, East Timor and South Sudan. They officially changed their name to Timor-Leste that year as well. And their president, I should say, was, I'm not sure I'm saying his first name right. I dug through a lot of videos to try to figure out how to pronounce his name, but they're all in Indonesian. So Zanana Gusmao was his name. He's the first president of East Timor. Violence started to erupt again in 2006 when a riot led to tens of thousands fleeing their home. The UN and the Australian military came in to put a stop to it. And it didn't really quell down. They had an election not long after that where they voted in a new president. People weren't happy about that. They're already mad about all the violence. Just, anger breeding anger. in a way. In 2008, their new president, Jose Ramos Horta, was actually very injured during an assassination attempt. He was shot in the stomach, but thankfully recovered. Some people did not survive that attempt. It was rough. I mean, Gusmao also had an attempt on his life during this time. It was rough, but eventually the violence was quelled down. The UN and the Australian military officially pulled out in 2012. And then in 2013, the government made a very surprising announcement. A whistleblower had come forward saying that the Australian government had bugged the Prime Minister of East Timor's office in 2004 to get a leg up on their oil and gas reserve negotiations. So around this area here, there are many oil and gas deposits worth billions upon billions of US dollars, right? So Australia wanted in on that. They controlled this area. East Timor was still figuring out their maritime boundaries at the time. So they negotiated to basically share the oil and gas, but Australia wound up coming out way on top, and they made so much money that East Timor could have really used to fix their infrastructure and their economy and improve the daily lives of the people there, things like that. So yeah, it turned out that was on purpose, that the Australian government was spying on the East Timorese government to figure out how to rip them off of those billions of dollars. The East Timorese government took it to the ICJ in The Hague, that'd be the International Court of Justice, there we go, to basically sue Australia in layman's terms. And all that The Hague really told them was like, no, like, okay, Australia, don't ever do that again. And Australia was like, okay. And there was no real resolution. There was no real apology. Australia wound up taking the whistleblower to court because they were violating government secrets. It was a real big mess, one that still is not resolved to this day. East Timor is still one of the poorest countries in Asia, like by far. And the area that they're located in is very prone to hurricanes, typhoons, and therefore prone to mudslides because of their terrain, and flooding also, which actually, as I'm recording this in April of 2021, there are massive floods happening on the island of Timor in Indonesia and East Timor. Many have lost their lives during these floods. It's a precarious time in human history, this age of climate change, where events like this are just going to get worse and worse. So, East Timor is one of those countries that literally almost everyone in the world is rooting for. We just want the best for them, and we want there to be peace and prosperity in this country. Fingers crossed that will happen someday. I really hope so. It's such a gorgeous country, very beautiful, lots of amazing animal life there, plant life there. Sandalwood is still a big export here. It's a beautiful little corner of the world. They even have coral reefs up here in the north, which, at this point in human history, this era of climate change, coral reefs need our protection more than ever. So yeah, we hope the best for Timor-Leste. If you're watching this from Timor-Leste, we want the best for you. You're an awesome country. And I don't have any extras to show you for this country, unfortunately. Maybe some other day. So that's it for tonight's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good